there, friends. Welcome to Knit Talk. I'm Megan of the Unapologetic Knitter, and I'm a tech editor. Today is not going to be a, wow, lights are just turning on randomly behind me and off again. Today is not going to be a technical video, and apparently my lights agree. But today I wanted to just sit down and chat with you a little bit about my trip to Kenya. Folks have expressed interest in learning what I did and what I saw, so I thought I would share some of that with you today. So I am dressed like this intentionally because this is actually what I wore almost every day while I was in Kenya. The t-shirt might have changed to a gray or a blue, but largely I was in this sweater. There was no makeup, my hair was in a ponytail, and other than these earrings, which I'll talk to you about in a little bit, this is how I explored Kenya. Also, it's really comfortable, so I'm enjoying being able to shoot today's video in such a relaxed state. The tour was hosted by a company called Craft Tours. I will make sure there's a link below so you can go check out their other offerings. This is not meant to be a promotional video. I just really liked the format that they created for us, and it was neat to learn that Jim, the owner of Craft Tours, who develops the program for each tour that the company offers, has done every single thing that we have done. So it's been vetted and given seal of approval. So that's kind of a neat idea. So as part of the Craft Tours, each one is assigned an actual host, and in our case, it was Tanis Gray of Tanis Knits. So Tanis and I have actually been working together for a little under 4 years. We started editing books together in around June of 2020. I've had the great pleasure of editing 5 books with her now, but this was the first time we got to see each other in person. So to say that there was some giggling and hugging and, oh my God, this is real, would be an understatement. So it was a really lovely time getting to see each other in person for the first time at the JFK airport. So in addition to Tanis and our local guide, Joyce, there were 12 of us in total on the tour. One of our tour goers was from France, and the rest of us were local Americans. We all met at JFK and then took a 15-hour flight from JFK right into the Jomo Kenyatta airport in Kenya, in Nairobi specifically. And that is the longest flight I have ever taken, for sure. I've taken flights from the East Coast to Scotland and Iceland, but that's more like 8 hours. 15 hours was a lot. We were given 3 meals, and when you're sitting for that long, you really don't need to eat that much, but it's one of those situations of like, well, at least it's something to do. So we knit a lot, we read our books a lot, we ate a lot, and then when we landed, it was around just before noon local time. We know when you're traveling 10,000 miles from your home, there's a bit of an expectation that things are going to feel really different when you land there. But I think the thing that I first thought when I landed was, oh, this feels a little bit like California. It was very warm. On average, during the days, the temperatures were between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That's around like 27 to 37 roughly degrees Celsius. I'd have to do that conversion. Given that I'm Canadian by birth, I should know that. All's that to say, it was hot during the day. And there were palm trees at the airport and palm trees down the road as we drove from the airport to our hotel. And I mean, everything was way more lush than I expected. But yeah, just lovely to sort of immediately have that sense of being like, oh, okay, this is cool. This is something I know. In the hotel specifically, which was an absolutely lovely location, we got to see all sorts of tourists coming and going. For the first time in 61 years, the Polish president visited Kenya, and he was actually staying at our hotel. So one night, as I was sitting in the lobby chatting with my husband, who was 11 hours behind me, so it was almost my bedtime, and he was just getting up to start the day, the president walked in. And so I got to see a little bit of his entourage, who were trying to be very casual, of course. They don't want to announce his presence. But he and his wife walked into the lobby, waved at people, smiled at people, said hello, and then got in the elevator and went up to their room. So I thought that was kind of a cool experience, because I can't imagine another situation in which I would ever lay eyes on the Polish president. So there we go. But I had a couple of other kind of neat experiences while I was at the hotel. As I was heading down to breakfast one morning, I got in the elevator, and there were two individuals who I immediately recognized as fellow Canadians. And you may ask yourself, how did I know they were Canadians? Because they weren't saying anything. The gentleman had a moose on his t-shirt. So I don't know anywhere else in the world that might put a moose on their t-shirt. That's a very Canadian thing. So we struck up a conversation about where they were visiting from. And as I stepped out of the elevator and said goodbye to them, a woman was walking down the hallway and heard me mention that I was from Hillsboro, Oregon. And she stopped me and she said, "I'm sorry to interrupt." She said, "But did you say you're from Hillsboro?" And I said, "Yes." Her daughter had moved from Senegal to the US to start working, and worked at Nike in Beaverton, which is 20 minutes away from where I live. And it just made the whole world feel that much smaller, that I would meet the mother of a woman, or the mother of a woman who now lived in a small town next door to me. So I just loved how everything just feels like we're all connected. I don't know if that's an over-exaggeration, but it was something that I really appreciated experiencing, just seeing how small the world really is. So one of the things that we were encouraged not to do from Joyce, our local tour guide, was take photos of local people. Of course, we want to respect their privacy, but we were given very strict instructions not to take pictures of any of the governmental buildings that we saw when we toured around downtown Nairobi. Although we didn't see a lot of local police out and about, apparently they are watching from a lot of different places, and if they see tourists taking photos of their government structures, they will stop the bus. They may confiscate your camera, in which case for most of us that was a phone, and just delay things. So while we did get to see a lot of the city of Nairobi, we don't have a lot of photos of it because we needed to respect the local people, but obviously respect the rules about not taking pictures of buildings that may be considered protected or compromised. So there are just a few photos of some local buildings, this specifically the Macmillan Library. There was talk about the lion sculptures outside being stolen from another building, perhaps an embassy down the road years and years ago, but the lions have now remained at this library. So one of the things that really struck me as we were leaving downtown Nairobi, the city center, and heading out of the city towards various tours that we were taking was the big wealth disparity that was so apparent within a very small area. The biggest would be the Kibera slums, which is only 4 miles from the city center of Nairobi. Kibera means jungle or forest. And our guide, Joyce, was telling us that it is also called the Chocolate City because of the corrugated metal that is used to create the living structures. It goes that really rich brown color. So although accounts seem to vary about how many people live there, Joyce was suggesting that it fluctuates anywhere between 700,000 and 1 million people living in those slums. They don't all have access to fresh running water or medical care. Joyce was an incredibly positive woman and liked to share so much about her city, and I think I appreciated that she didn't gloss over things that might have made us uncomfortable. She talked about the things that we were seeing. So our first stop on the first full day in Kenya, when we actually left the town site proper, was to head to a smaller town called Karen. And we went to the home of Karen Blixen, who is the writer of Out of Africa. If you are not familiar, it is a movie from, I think, the early 80s or late 70s, starring Robert Redford and Meryl Streep, and it is based on this woman's actual life. Karen Blixen was out of Denmark. And when she married her first husband, they moved to Kenya to start a coffee plantation. She originally thought they were going to be raising cattle, but he was convinced that he should start a coffee farm. And for the many, many years that Karen lived in Africa, she produced almost no coffee. They were not actually living at the right elevation to be farming coffee beans. So it was a bit of a failed attempt, but it was kind of neat to learn that the beverage that I drink every morning when I start my day is actually, it has a specific elevation that it needs to be grown at. So I thought that was cool. We also learned that Kenya is very well known for black teas. I also did not know that. So at the hotel each morning when I had my breakfast, I actually had a beautiful cup of tea instead of coffee, because when you're there, you gotta drink it, right? The coffee was, of course, lovely, but the tea was an extra special treat. On our second day out of Nairobi, we took a trip to the Sheldrick Wildlife Orphanage. No, pardon me. Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, which is an orphanage. They house baby elephants, and they actually had some baby rhinos on site that day. At the time that we visited, they had 21 baby elephants ranging in age from 6 months all the way up to about 4 years old. And we got to see them running down the hill, heading towards us, ready for their daily bottle feeding. There are any number of reasons why these elephants are in the orphanage, but they are all as a result of rescues. So in some cases, there's injury, there's drought. Unfortunately, there are issues of poaching. And so when the Wildlife Trust learns about these baby elephants who have been either separated from their mother because of, drought or injury, or if the mother has been killed, they bring them to this orphanage and raise them there. There are so many incredible facts about this. I am going to link to the Wildlife Trust below, but I just want to share a little bit more about what we got to learn from the guides that were there. First, we got to see the baby rhino, and he stole the show, in my opinion. He was just so sweet and followed his caretaker all the way around the little pond that we were standing around. They threw mud and dirt on top of him to help stay cool, and he looked from where I was small enough to just pick up and cuddle. So I thought that was super sweet. Once the little rhino went back to his enclosure, they released the elephants in 2 groups. They had them sort of 2 years and under, and then 2 years and over. There was a huge social difference between the 2 age groups. The younger ones were very much interested in the caretakers. They wanted their bottles, and they just kind of followed their caretakers around. The 2 and up group were far more social, playing with each other, going into the pond. They were way more interested in engaging with each other. So that was really delightful to see. And although we couldn't visually tell the difference between any of these elephants, every caretaker knew each one by name, and they were trying to point out which one was which to each of us. But what we learned about their time at the Wildlife Trust is that they're generally there until they're about 4 years of age. The huts that they sleep in each night can have the door closed, but it sounds like in general they leave the doors open because they want to encourage the elephants to go back to being not cared for. They want them to grow and mature and eventually move into a herd. So as the elephants get a little bit older, close to that 4-year range, they say that the animals will stop coming back at such regular intervals. They may start to miss dinner and then just come back to go to bed at night. And then eventually they say they don't come back. And when that happens, because they are in an enclosed trust area, they go find the elephant and they transfer them to another location, which is a larger conservancy called the Salvo Conservancy. And the thing that still blows my mind about the reason why that Salvo Conservancy is there, or like where it is specifically, is because the soil is the same color. So the elephants recognize that the soil at the Sheldrick Conservancy or Wildlife Trust is the same as at the Salvo Conservancy, and it helps them feel more comfortable and reintegrate into a herd. So once they're at the Salvo location, they are really not directly cared for anymore. They've become independent and they are integrated into the herd and they live out their lives there. So these wildlife trusts and conservancies are generally nonprofit organizations. They are there simply for the well-being of the animals. The caretakers do everything they can, but are limited by the resources they are given. So if you are interested in helping out an orphan, you can actually adopt an orphan elephant or the orphan rhino. So for as little as $50 a year, and I know I sound like one of those infomercials, but I just think it's such a small amount. For as little as $50 a year, you can adopt an elephant or the baby rhino, simply meaning you're contributing to their care through your financial contribution. But once you sign up to adopt, you get regular updates on the welfare of the animal. You learn about whether they transition to the next conservancy. I just think it's wonderful. So I will be adopting the little rhino because he totally stole my heart, but I'm going to have a link below if you decide that you want to adopt an elephant or a baby rhino of your own. After leaving the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust where we saw the elephants, we had some more animals to see, and our next stop was a giraffe conservancy. Unfortunately, I don't actually remember the specific name of the place we went, but it was still within the Karen region. And we got to see the Rothschild giraffe. We learned that there are actually 3 species of giraffe in Kenya, and we actually did get to see all 3 of them. On this particular day, we saw the Rothschild. They're also known as the white sock giraffe. So just above their knees, their spots largely disappear, and it looks like they're wearing white socks. So that's why they're called that. We did end up seeing all 3 species. So we saw Rothschild at the Conservancy. We saw the Maasai giraffe the day after at Lake Naivasha, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And then when we went to the Sweetwaters camp in the Nanyuki region, so north of Nairobi quite a bit, we got to see the reticulated giraffe. So after both of those animal sightings that day, we went back to our hotel for the evening and got up bright and early the next day for our next big adventure, which took us back out of Nairobi up to Lake Naivasha, which is, I think, the 2nd largest freshwater lake in Kenya. And when we were there, we were going to see the hippos. So they separated the 12 of us into different boats. So 4 of us were in a boat, and we were taken out onto the lake by a local guide who was able to identify the animals that we saw at the edge of the lake, all of the birds, and also the hippos. We saw 1 hippo out of the water, but apparently that's quite uncommon. They expected he was probably, he had previously been a dominant male that perhaps lost his companions, and so he was kind of isolated. He was very pink, sitting in the sun. Apparently the hippos spend most of the day in the water, staying cool, and the limitation on getting close to the hippos, as according to our guide, was about 7.5 meters. We definitely got closer than 7.5 meters. But to be fair, they have specific regions in the lake that the guides are all familiar with, so they were able to take us to areas where they typically see them. Each group of hippos is apparently quite territorial, so their locations were very far away from each other in the grand scheme of things, but you never knew exactly where they were going to pop up, and so you'd just be kind of puttering along looking, and then a hippo would just pop its head up out of the water like 10 feet away from you. So pretty incredible. While we were on the lake, we also saw some local fishermen. Apparently they will come down every day with a mesh bag on their back, and they are simply holding fishing line that they're casting into the lake to catch the fish. They're largely catching tilapia. And we actually popped over and bought a few fresh fish from one of these local fishermen and used them to lure in the fish eagles, which look a lot like a bald eagle, but in my opinion, they're quite a bit larger. So once we were done on the boats, we got to have our land legs back. I don't spend a lot of time on the water, so I was a little wobbly getting out of the boat. But we actually got to do a walking tour with some local guides at the same Lake Naivasha Conservancy where we got to go out with the hippos. And I think this might have been the highlight of the trip for most of us. I mean, I loved that baby rhino at the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. But we were just walking among the animals. We had zebras like 15 feet away from us, and you could hear them making those little nickering sounds that they make. Giraffes were 20 feet away and didn't even care. They would just stare at us while they ate the local shrubbery and then just walk on by as if we weren't even there. I saw wildebeests. I had only ever seen them in the Lion King movie where they were depicted running through that valley where Mufasa was eventually killed. Hopefully that's not a spoiler for anybody. The video's been out for so many years. But apparently they tend to graze in the same area as zebras. We learned that zebras are black with white stripes, and the reason we were told that they know this is when they are still in the womb, before they are birthed, they are black, and then as they are born, they get the white stripes, or before they're born, they have the white stripes. Each striping pattern is unique to every single animal, and we learned how to identify a male from a female. So the males typically have a very straight back, and the females have a little curve in their back. So that's how you can tell one from the other. Otherwise, there's not a lot of distinction between the two genders of the zebras. We also got to see impalas and water bucks, which look kind of like fuzzy reindeer to me. Yeah, they were standing in the water, eating the local plant life that was in the water. So our last 3 days, 2 nights after leaving Nairobi were spent in the Nanyuki region. We stayed on the Ol Pejeta Conservancy, which is one of the larger conservancies in Kenya, and it is right at the equator, which is kind of cool. I got to be a tourist and stand on each side of the equator because when you're there, you have to, right? I think one of the things that I really loved about the conservancy is just the visual access that we have to these animals. We were staying in canvas-sided tents, which meant 2 things. 1, no heat, although they were glamping tents, let's be clear. There was beautiful, comfortable beds. There was a shower and a restroom in each tent. But the canvas sides meant it was cold at night. It gets down to about 50 degrees or 10 degrees Celsius. But it also meant you got to hear the animals all night. And while I did definitely sleep well out there, far better than I did when we were in Nairobi itself, there was one morning I woke up around 4 a.m. and I could hear the lions chuffing, that whoa, whoa, whoa. You could just, it gives you chills, but at the same time, you're just like, wow, like I'm never going to hear that anywhere else. So pretty cool to be that close to the animals. There was an electric fence between our tent and the animals, so they couldn't actually hurt us or come bother us in any case. They wouldn't hurt us, I'm sure. I don't know. It's a silly statement, I suppose. I didn't fear for my life in any case, but it was still very cool to be able to hear them being so active at night. Because there was no heat in the tents, we were treated to a hot water bottle left in our beds before we went to bed each night, which was very cool. But the Conservancy is the home to the last 2 northern white rhinos in the world. The previous male died in, I think, 2008, and they are still working on ways to use his sperm to regrow the population, but the only 2 remaining on the Conservancy are his daughter and granddaughter. So I'm not sure what the fate of those will be, but we did get to see lots of black rhinos and southern white rhinos, giraffes, more zebras. We got to see hyenas up close and in person, and they're way cuter than I thought they were going to be. And we got to see warthogs, and every time they run, their tail goes up, and it's the cutest thing ever. So we went on 5 safaris, I believe. We did 3 afternoon safaris and 2 morning safaris. And the morning safaris were very chilly. It was quite a dichotomy to be out first thing in the morning and like wrapped up in your sweaters and your scarves just trying to stay warm, versus the afternoon safaris where you have the windows open, you're just trying to get a breeze and you're in your t-shirt and your sunscreen just waiting for a cool moment. But while we were on those safaris, so we were again separated in groups of 4 in 3 separate jeeps. And if we saw an animal that we wanted to see, our guide would stop, or we could ask them to stop because they were just driving, trying to find the animals for us. We would stop and we'd get to stand up on the seats and take videos or photos out the top of the jeep and just listen to the animals and watch the animals do what they do. I think the Cape buffalo were some of the most interesting animals. They're certainly very large, and I think, just based on my very limited knowledge there, I think they might be one of the largest population of animals on the Conservancy. They were always in huge groups, and we liked to joke that they were the judgy ones. I'm sure they didn't actually care, but they would just stop and just stare at you, and it felt like they were kind of looking right through you. But then they would just amble on and do what they do. So it was pretty incredible just to see the animals living in their own world, not really bothered by us being there. I think one of the most surprising things that we learned on the safaris is that on the Conservancy there are park rangers. And we did see a couple of them while we were out there. They are in a dark green outfit, and presumably to sort of blend in with the background, although on the open plains there's not a lot to hide behind. But these are generally individuals. We only ever saw them by themselves. They were never with a vehicle. They were never near any kind of structure. They were simply walking through the Conservancy, making sure that there were no poachers on the property, making sure that the animals were healthy. But all they have is a stick, like an arm's length of a stick, to sort of presumably keep the animals away if they got too close. I don't know. It's just one person out there by themselves. We were told that they do carry a pistol concealed just in case they get into a situation that they can't handle. But they're just walking out there with the hyenas and the lions and other things with teeth. So it was quite an experience to see them out there by themselves. On the last day of our time on the Ol Pejeta Conservancy, we did stop at the rhino graveyard on the Conservancy. I will admit that I got quite emotional. Not only is Sudan the last northern white rhino there, the last male northern white rhino buried there, but there was about 20 other grave markers of rhinos that had been killed by poachers. And I think what hit me the most about that is that we learned that we know that rhinos are hunted for their horns, but what we learned from a local guide is that you can take the horn from a rhino and it will live. It doesn't need it to survive. It won't necessarily grow back, but you can remove it and it won't kill the animal. And so the killings of the animals were simply to make it easier to take the horn. So it was really challenging to see. It was really challenging to see. I'm not sure what else to say about that. We know that poaching is a reality in every part of the world where animals are abused or mistreated for parts of their bodies. But that was just very telling about how much these animals are loved, but also how endangered they are. So it's good to see that animal conservancies exist to protect these animals. But that doesn't mean that the poachers have been stopped. They still do sneak onto the property. And as gruesome as it sounds, we did learn that the rangers have orders to shoot and kill a poacher if they are seen on property. So before I wrap up this video, which is going to end with a slideshow of videos and photos set to the song that we were treated to at a local bead factory, I just wanted to talk about 3 special places that we got to go as part of our travels between locations. The first is the Kobe Bead and Leather Shop. It's actually called Kobe Tough. Kobe is the sea turtle, the shell specifically. So they're talking about the strength of the animal. This is a bead factory that is women owned and women run, and they use local clays to make beads in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And then they are fired and glazed right on property and sold in a little shop right on property. So I think one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this shop is how wonderfully we were treated when we arrived. We had not planned to make a stop at this shop, but there was some people on our tour who knew about it and asked if we could go. So at the last minute, we decided to make a detour to this shop. And when we arrived, it had to have been very close to the end of their work day. But they welcomed us so graciously and took us on a tour so that we could learn all about their processes. But the thing that touched me the most was, we showed up as strangers at their working facility where I'm sure they were tired at the end of a long day, and they still decided to greet us with a song and dance. And it was absolutely beautiful. And I think, it's so different from what you would ever experience here. I mean, certainly working facilities are different across the world, but if a group of tourists, for lack of a better term, showed up your place of work as you were trying to leave for the end of the day, the reception would not be, sure, let's take you on a tour and also treat you to an incredibly beautiful local song. It would be, thanks, come back another day. So I loved that they were so welcoming. I was quite touched by it, and it certainly has made me reevaluate how I approach other people when they want to learn more about me or what I do. The next place that we went was actually up near the Ol Pejeta Conservancy. It was the Nanyuki Spinners and Weavers. And for me, this was going to be the highlight of my trip. Because I now spin fiber into yarn, I wanted to see what practices might be the same, what practices might be different. And when we showed up, we were again welcomed and given a tour of the facilities. We learned about the fibers that they used, and I will admit to being a little bit surprised. Although I didn't do a ton of research before I went on this trip because I was actually deep in a book editing window. My husband kind of surprised me with the trip, so I didn't have a lot of time to plan. I did a little bit of research about the local fibers, and the red Maasai sheep is local to Kenya, and so I assumed, wrongly, that would be the fiber that they would be using. It turns out there is a huge population of merino sheep in Kenya, so they are using merino fibers to spin their yarns. They spin their yarns in the grease, meaning that it's sheared off of the animal. They card it so it's nice and soft and the fibers are separate so they can spin it, but they don't really wash it or treat it before they spin it. So we learned that once it's spun, they actually wash it 10 times to get it nice and clean so that it looks like it had been cleaned before they spun it. And then they use local plant materials to dye the yarns. We saw several of the different herbs and plants that they use, including mint, which I was the most surprised at, not because I didn't think you could dye with mint, but more that it just looks very different from the mint that I grow in my backyard. It's almost sagey. It's a little fuzzy looking. And then we also learned that they use the cochineal bug. It kind of looks like fuzz on a cactus, but when you pull it off and rub it between your fingers, it turns this gorgeous bright red. So once we were done getting a tour of the facilities and learning about, they use spinning wheels as well as drop spindle methods to spin their yarns. They do single ply as well as multiply. And then they dye it, and then they weave it. So Unlike us knitters who are knitting our yarn together, they're using it in weavings to make mats and shawls and rugs. So we got to take a tour of their showroom and support them by purchasing some of their local weavings as well. So I'm going to have links to both the Kobe Tough Bead Shop and the Nanyuki Weavers and Spinners Guild in the description below the video. I never feel particularly comfortable asking people for money, but I do really believe in supporting women and women-owned and women-run businesses. So if you have some extra dollars laying around and you can afford to help support these women's resource or organizations, I would love for you to check them out and spend your dollars with them. So a big part of traveling from Nairobi to our various tour locations, or from Nairobi up to the Ol Pejeta Conservancy in Nanyuki, which was a 4-hour drive, was stopping at local markets. We would stop in, use their restroom facilities, which they were always very gracious about, but in turn there was a small expectation of supporting the local economy. Basically, buying local art for ourselves or as gifts for our friends and family. And while there was never a ton of pressure, it was kind of expected that you would do this. And I actually loved it. I'm a big lover of art, paintings specifically, and although I have several pieces currently in my closet, they are not yet framed. So once I have those framed, I may do another quick video to share what I got. But the one thing that I was really taken with were the carvings. They have 3 local woods, acacia, ebony, and rosewood, that are often used to be made into carvings. And we learned that there's one particular local tribe, the Kamba tribe, which are known for their carving abilities. At one of our stops, we were using the restroom facilities, which were behind the main market, and we witnessed some of these Kamba tribesmen working, and they were very gracious and said that we could take their photos if we would like. I, of course, only took one photo because they're working and it feels disrespectful to be all up in their business. So these are some of the people doing their work for the carvings, and I did bring home a couple of carvings with me. These are both ebony carvings, and they will sit in a place of pride for me for years to come. They will just always be such a good memory of the trip. So that's where we're gonna wrap it up, folks. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know this was a much longer video, but I hope you enjoyed learning what I did and saw and experienced on my trip. I'm going to leave you with the song that we received when we visited the Kobe Tough Bead and Leather Factory as background to sharing some more slides of the trip. Thank you for spending your time with me. I hope to see you next Wednesday during our regularly scheduled Knit Talk episode. And until then, happy knitting.